Good afternoon. What an awesome day it's been so far. It's been very insightful, and I've learned a lot from all speakers, let's put it that way. Today I'm going to start with a personal story about me. I never grew up being passionate about Africa. In fact, I bought into the American dream, but I ended up in Australia. To be fair, it was amazing in Australia. I really enjoyed my time in Australia. But something happened roughly about 10 to 12 years ago. And in that time frame, I read a report by McKinsey, actually written by a couple of impressive Africans, called Lions on the Move. And in that report, it was the first time I'd seen a report that was written with optimism about Africa. And before that, all I heard were the negative stories about Africa. And a couple of years later, I decided to move back to the continent. I live in South Africa now. And one of the things that actually started with that is, because I'm an author, I write for articles, I started doing a lot of research. I read far and wide, from anthropology, technology trends, political landscapes, to actually seeing some trends that happen on the continent. One of the big things I picked up very quickly was that we're always quite impressive in our achievements, but we don't tell our stories. Now, I'll give you about 4 odd stories that have happened in the past sort of centuries that we probably never talk about. The first one, which most people don't know about, was about 70,000 years ago. The first Homo sapiens on the continent originated from East Africa. Thank you. And more impressively is they figured out how to traverse the entire world. If you're not impressed by that, you just try walking from one country to the next without any roads, and then you realize how impressive that is. But the question is, why don't we talk about this? You might say, Nnamdi, that is too far out. Let's look at 30,000 years ago. 30,000 years ago, the first mathematical artifact was found in Swaziland. Yes. So in principle, mathematics started off in Africa, even though we talk about it originating in Egypt. But we don't know these stories. And you might say, Nnamdi, that still is too far out. Let's look about 1,000 years ago. A lady called Fatima Al-Firi founded the first still existing university in the world, in Morocco. Yes. And why I'm impressed by her, aside from the fact that she's a female Muslim, the question I ask myself, what if she never founded those universities? Would we have Harvard today, Yale, Oxford? Would we? But we never write their stories. And you might say, Nnamdi, that is still too far out. You might say that's still too far out. And let's talk about M-Pesa. And also, it's very annoying for me when I go to conference and I talk about M-Pesa, and people still don't know about M-Pesa. 10 years ago, M-Pesa was launched in Kenya, and it's proven to probably be the most successful financial services product in the world. Yeah. Thank you. And one question I keep asking myself is, why don't we see this in our history books? When I open my school book, or you open your school book, why aren't these stories in the history books? And because I travel far and wide and write about African innovators, I come across these very impressive African innovators, and something bothers me a lot. I go to the conferences, I meet them in a domicile, and they're doing impressive work. I go into my hotel room, and I type in innovation in Kenya, innovation in Botswana, innovation in Sierra Leone or Abidjan. Nothing pops up. And you know, in this day and age, if you're not on Google, you might as well not exist. I'm going to start off with, I'm going to talk about a few African innovators I've come across who you might not know of, and I'll just talk to you about them. Let's start with the first one, a company called Fido. a Nigerian who's a molecular biologist invented a product that can detect malaria in 25 minutes. You pee on the stick, and it tells you in 25 minutes whether you've got malaria or not. And if you've ever had malaria, you'll understand how important this is. And this actually should be across the continent, distributed across the continent. Not only has he invented it, he's actually commercialized it. The second one, Vula Mobile. It's actually started by an ophthalmologist in South Africa, and he got frustrated when he traveled 4 hours into Eastern Cape to meet an old lady who's got cataracts, and says, "Oh, Gogo, you've got cataracts." And he drives 4 hours back, and Gogo's got to drive 4 hours to Cape Town. And he got very frustrated. For a 20-minute operation, the amount of time spent to actually fix this problem is enormous. So he developed an app called Vula Mobile. So any rural health worker could scan Gogo's eyes and tell her, "You've got cataracts," and book her into the closest hospital around. Last year, I believe he did about 80,000 odd operations using this app. Why don't we know about them? And the last one, which I actually find very impressive, Sweep South. In Africa, you guys would know, unemployment is a huge, huge problem. Huge problem, mostly double digits. And how do we fund, or how do we find jobs for these guys? She's come up with a program, an app called Sweep South, which is pretty much an Uber for domestic workers. You can literally download this app, pick a domestic worker based on the rating, and they'll come to your house, you pay them directly through the app, and it's working. She's employed over 3,000 South Africans today, and on an African expansion drive. Very impressive innovators, and this is just a few of the innovators I've been chronicling along the way in the past few years. And when I actually think about innovation, and part of the hard thing about innovation is there's a lot of I feel the world's going to look like this, Africa's going to look like this. And the reality, as someone said earlier, you can't anyone tells you they can predict what Africa's going to look like or innovation is going to look like is lying to you. It's very hard to do that. So it is actually quite subjective. So what you actually need to do is try and figure out the environment most people are going to live in the next sort of 10, 15, 20, 30 years, even up to 100 years, and figure out what the environment is going to look like, and then you can actually tell a story. And what I do when I write my stories, to move from the I feel to quantitative data, I use a lot of statistics and mathematics. I use a lot of anthropology. I don't know if you guys know of anthropology, but it means the study of human behavior, to actually talk about the face behind the numbers. And I look at a lot of global trends, global tech trends, and how they impact the continent today. And when you use these, they actually start to tell a story. And that's a very important part. And what I'm going to try and do is take you through a journey with these thought processes to actually paint a picture of what Africa would look like in the next coming decades. So we start off, what the numbers look like in 80 years. So that's between now and 2100. 40% of the world's working population would be in Africa. 40% of the world's working population would be in Africa. That's a very important point, because this means if this working population is not prepared, they haven't got access to good education, good health, good water and energy, it's not just an African problem, it's a global problem. And put it in context, 2035 isn't far away. That's 15 to 16 years from now. So we can't wait for 15 to 16 years' time to actually fix this problem. We've got to start today. Another stat that you might find fascinating, and actually this for me was a very interesting one, when you look at the projections for the top 100 global cities in the next coming century, 35 of those cities will be in Africa. Currently sitting at 10%. So it shows there's a massive, massive population growth that's going to be spiking in the coming decades. And if you start to use population growth as an indicator of economic prosperity, you can actually start to see the movement of which countries will start to play a major role on the continent. And of the 35%, 7 of those would be Nigeria, with Lagos being the largest city in the world by 2100. This is the part most of the Nigerians go wild. right? And this means Nigeria can't fail as a country in the continent. If seven of the largest megacities in the world reside in your country, Lagos being the largest city in the world, Nigeria can't fail. And if you start to apply an anthropology lens on this, there's a theory that actually says we might actually have to learn Yoruba, which is one of the top 3 languages spoken in Nigeria today. And most people think, Nnamdi, that is so far-fetched. What does it mean? But it's not too far-fetched when you think about it. You want to go to China, you learn Mandarin, right? Because of the economic growth there. It's not far-fetched for us then to learn Yoruba. And I use an argument here that last year, Brazil made Yoruba its official language, with Yoruba being taught in schools today. So if the Brazilians know something, we should also figure it out. Then we've talked about the stats, we've talked about a bit of anthropology. Let's talk about the technology landscape in Africa today. And most people think of technology in a very far away type of thought process. AI is going to happen in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And what I'm going to try to do is take you through 3 examples of Silicon Valley type technology, and use Silicon Valley very loosely in the sense it could be Google, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent on the continent. And when I was writing my second book called Taking on Silicon Valley, I saw this very subtle trend of technology, Silicon Valley technology players actually disrupting industries we never think about. Let's start with the first one, Google. Anyone knows Google? All right. Has anyone actually ever seen any marketing done for Google? No, right? But the reality is Google knows everything about you, right? They know when you're buying a car, what do? You type in BMW or Hyundai in Google search. They know when you're having a baby, you type in pram or baby's clothes, right? They know when you're buying a house. They know everything about you. And for years I've been talking about it, even in my book, that says Google, in essence, could become a bank. Google could become a bank. And last year, they became a bank. They got an e-money license in Lithuania, and they got an e-money license in Ireland, which changes the game, because we're all used to the banks, the traditional banks you've got to go into to get your money or put your money in, not Google. But the reality is, they could become a bank, because they know everything about you. They could say, Nnamdi, we see you're about to have a baby, you're trying to get a bigger car here, we've negotiated a deal with the closest dealership for you, 1 click, checkout. I'm there, signing up. And it's happening today, not far-fetched. The second one, talk about KYC. I don't know if you guys know what KYC is, but it's know your customer. So most banks ask you to provide your 3-month bank statements, provide your proof of address, a bit of DNA samples, so we can open up an account. And it gets very frustrating, right, for you. And they need to know you as a customer, know your customer. But Facebook actually know you better than the banks do these days, or your telco operators. And what happens, if you've ever tried this exercise, what happens if one day you decide to log out of your Facebook account on your phone and do it on a brand new computer? Something happens. You get an email immediately saying, is this you? Right? It doesn't matter which country you're in. Is this you? You've got to be impressed by that. How does Facebook know we're 2 billion people at any one time? This is true KYC. And then one day, we'll have to log into our banking accounts using Facebook or Google. And people think that's far-fetched, but no, it isn't. Because these days, for most online commerce sites, when you log in, it asks you, either you can log in with your Facebook account, or you can log in with your Google account. That's true KYC, know your customer. And of these two, the one that actually bothers me the most, which is exciting and scary at the same time, is Truecaller. Anyone know Truecaller? Yeah, so those who don't know Truecaller, it's an app that blocks off all the spam calls you get. In South Africa, and having tested in Mauritius, in South Africa, I know for sure 3 banks come up as spam on Truecaller. 2 telcos, including my telco, come up as spam on Truecaller. It's like, wow, how does a small fintech somewhere in Europe block large multinationals? Very impressive. And we spend a lot of time doing the marketing to these customers, to ourselves, banking, or your telco provider. But the truth is you can't get through to these customers, because what do we do when we see the Truecaller? We just click decline. And one of the things you've got to think about with these technology trends, and it's been fascinating for me to see it, has anyone ever called their call centers? Anyone called Google's call center? No. Why? It just works. And I ask people, have you called your bank's call center? Yes. Have you called your telco call center? Yes. And the hypothesis I have is if you have a large call center in your business, or you're going into the call center industry, and you think of building a call center in this day and age, there's a direct correlation between that and business in operational inefficiencies in your business. And when I wrap this up, the question I actually want to ask here and propose here is, we should actually realize disruption in Africa is already here. When we talk about AI or we talk about intelligence, it's not happening in 10, 15 years' time. It's happening today. All that will happen is we're going to build on this. And because I'm an engineer by background, and I like facts, I don't like to propose and talk about stuff without actually having facts, I turned to mathematics. When I was a kid, I loved mathematics. It was my best subject. I've never admitted that until I was old enough right now to actually talk about it. Otherwise, I'd be labeled a nerd. And when I'm actually looking at these trends, I use a lot of mathematics. I look at a concept called the law of large numbers. I use a bit of social network analysis. I use the diffusion innovation theory. And I love the last one, the diffusion innovation theory, which I'll actually break down a bit now. But the diffusion innovation theory is a very interesting one. And one of the challenges I had when I was talking about innovation in Africa is, how do we know we're making progress? We don't, because it's a touchy-feely subject. How do we know we're making progress? We might find some very impressive innovators, but we don't know if we're achieving targets. And if you apply the diffusion innovation theory to Africa, it starts to actually paint a picture of what Africa should look like. And it's very simple. The theory is very simple. I'll simplify it here. So let's assume you're launching the next new phone, the iPhone 10, the Samsung 10, or the Samsung 99. It doesn't matter. And you're targeting about 1,000 or 1,000,000 people. The theory says that about 15 to 18% of people need to use your product for you to get to that tipping point, where it's just prevalent in the society. At about 2.5%, that theory they call the innovators. These are the crazy people when the new phone is coming out. They stand outside at midnight and buy the product. Meanwhile, they can get it the next day half price. They're just passionate about the product. When I apply this principle to Africa, at 1.2 billion people, when you apply the theory of diffusion innovation, at 15% to 18%, you need about 250 million Africans just to be passionate about our continent, think positively about our continent. Whether you're an accountant, whether you're a laborer, whether you're a domestic worker, whether you're a lawyer, we just need to figure out how to move Africa forward. Doesn't matter. At about 2.5%, these are the guys I call the innovators, the entrepreneurs. 2.5% of 1.2 billion people is 30 million Africans, 30 million innovators, 30 million entrepreneurs, who I believe can really drive Africa forward. And actually, that's what the Disrupting Africa Encyclopedia, which I'll talk about, is all about. Then I have a theory that there's a smaller subset in there, which I call the visionaries. So think Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs changed the landscape of technology across the world. Without Steve Jobs, you probably wouldn't have WhatsApp. You can imagine doing WhatsApp on SMS, it just doesn't work. And if you apply that theory to Africa, you only need 17 visionaries to disrupt Africa. And today, I've only come across one. My life's mission is to find the other 16. And when we find them, the only job we have is to make sure we support them, promote them, provide them whatever services they need to actually move Africa forward. So this is all very nice and good, Nnamdi, when you've talked about the technology, you've talked about the trends, you've talked about the statistics and mathematics. Great, Nnamdi, you're tracking. But what does this have to do with storytelling? And it actually bothered me for a very long time trying to figure this out. How do we marry storytelling, the importance of storytelling and technology? Is there a correlation between the two? And it so happens there is. So some research has been done in the United States that show that the kids who used to watch Star Trek, who used to watch Star Wars and Minority Report, the sliding and all that, when they grew up 2 or 3 decades later, there was a massive surge in patents in the technology space. So those are the guys who now start creating technologies that we're using today. There's also then hypotheses that say the kids today who are watching the likes of Harry Potter will become more empathetic in the next 2 or 3 decades because they're actually dealing with minorities now. They know the plight of the minority populace. And I ask myself the same question. Does this apply to Africa as well? What stories do we hear about ourselves as kids that might actually affect us today? Is there a negative correlation? And I could tell you a personal story. And you guys would probably know this. When you were in school, we taught A is for apple, B is for ball. And I remember when I moved from the UK as a kid to Nigeria, I remember the first time I saw an apple. Because apples are not generic, they don't grow in West Africa. The first time I saw an apple was when I was about 12 years old. My dad had traveled to South Africa and he came back with an apple. I was like, wow, this is an apple. I was so excited by it. And what did I do? This was over the December holidays. I wrapped it up nicely in a newspaper and put it in the cupboard. Going to show my friends an apple when the school reopened. And guess what happened to the apple in January? It was rotten. And I fast forward 2 to 3 decades later, I asked myself, did that story, the fact that I'd never seen an apple, influence me today to think of African innovation in a different light? And I asked myself, why can't A be for agbalumo, which is a Nigerian product? Nigerian fruit, or any African fruit. Why can't that be the case? Why can't it be the case? Why don't we tell our kids the stories that they relate to today? Because some of these stories are too far-fetched for us. So if I have a daymare, which sometimes scares me or excites me, depends on how I feel on that day. I have this feeling that one day we're going to wake up in 2 or 3 decades, and in school, a kid is learning, and the teacher's saying, who are the greatest technology entrepreneurs of your time? And they'll rattle it off. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and there'll be no African innovator in there or entrepreneur. And I get so scared and worried. And I say, there's got to be an and. There's got to be an innovator we say, and this innovator from Africa. And that's what the Disrupting Africa Encyclopedia is all about. When I decided to find the 30 million Africans who can disrupt our continent. And I know this for myself because I'm not objective about African innovation or Africa in itself. I'm too optimistic. I'm on the other spectrum. And I think I'll balance the people who are pessimistic about the continent. And why an encyclopedia? An encyclopedia forces you to be objective. It forces you to have referenceable material. And I want the day that the next generation after me would say, I know that African innovator. Why? Not because Nnamdi says so, because I can see referenceable material. And because of what they've done, I will be better. This is why stories are very important for us as a continent. And I'll leave you one parting question. What if we wrote our stories? Imagine a world where we write our own stories. We alone can write our own stories. Thank you.